Nielsen 5 is a kind of change in direction in his career as a composer of symphonies. His first 4 symphonies all begin with kind of like an explosion. And then with the 5th symphony, you get a complete change of tack. So the 5th symphony, it just starts very, very quietly, just with the violas on their own, playing a kind of oscillating third between A and C. The 5th symphony doesn't have a name, but it kind of doesn't need one. And Nielsen's explanation for this is that all of the previous names that he'd given to his symphonies are more or less synonyms for the same concept, which is, he said, de hvilende kræfter i modsætning til det aktive, which roughly translates as the resting forces in opposition to active ones. So that really encapsulates the form of this symphony, where you have resting forces in the first part that are gradually building up their musical energy, and then that's released as the active forces in the second part. It's like static electricity building up over the course of maybe 20 minutes worth of music, and then it's all discharged into the second part of the symphony. If you start quietly, the process of charging the music with energy goes on for a long time. It starts piano and it dims down to 2 Ps. Nothing to do with the tonic key of the symphony either. The symphony is ostensibly in E flat major. So you've got a C and an A, which don't appear to have anything to do with E flat at all. So we're starting a long, long way from the actual tonal destination that the symphony achieves by the end. And it achieves it very, very emphatically as well. Looking a few bars ahead, the first instruments to join the violas are the bassoons, and they play a horn call. For a horn call, you'd normally expect French horns to play, right? So the choice of bassoons for that moment is also a slightly disturbing choice. No disrespect to bassoonists. So there's a sort of a feeling of dejection or apathy, perhaps. We have to bear in mind the historical context of this. It's just after the end of the First World War that this is being composed, when there was a great deal of reflection going on in European society. And this horn call idea is circulated around various pairs of instruments, but not ever in the same key. So it's almost as if you've got this thing that you're concentrating on, this ostinato that stays there the whole time, but you're looking at it from different harmonic angles each time. It's almost like he's showing us the materials before he starts to build them up into a structure. Even to put it slightly more controversially, he's in a way teaching us how to listen to music in this opening passage. Over the course of 20 minutes or so, there's this gradual layering up effect that's going on in the music until by the end of this movement, you've got 3 really important ideas that have been built up. The first one is an idea that comes from the viola ostinato. Every time something happens, the violas respond to it, and they have their ostinato, and then it has a break, a rupture in it, and then it returns to its resting kind of state. So that's one idea. The second idea is it's kind of like a chorale tune, or I like to think of it as a noble theme, which is a kind of a thematic type in Nielsen's music. It's usually singable, and it's usually scored in the tenor register. third and most ominous component of this is the snare drum rhythm, which appears quite early on in the movement. It goes away and then it returns again several times. But the last time it returns, it's over the top of the other two themes, that little kind of warble that's going on there, that we get from the violas in the first place. The rest of the orchestra playing this sonorous, harmonious kind of music, sort of trying to bring everyone together. And then the disruptive snare drum, who is playing music that's written out to begin with, but at the climactic moment, the notes disappear and Nilsson simply writes ad lib with an instruction to be as disruptive as possible. If you're the snare drum player in this symphony, you're really a big soloist, and it's up to you to try and defeat the whole of the rest of the orchestra in this huge battle that's staged right at the apex of all this charged energy that's been building up over 18-20 minutes or so. Eventually, the harmonious music comes to a conclusion and the snare drum begins to subside. So in effect, this movement is kind of a narrative about the victory of the harmonious aspect of music over the disruptive. The snare drum repeats its rhythm, getting quieter and quieter over and over again until it finally comes to an end. And you're just left with a single clarinet playing this nature voice type warble over the top until it comes to rest, and that's the end of the movement. Then you're left with the indeterminate space between the two parts, and then the second part is unleashed. It is unleashed in this hyper-energetic, typically Nilsson-esque 3/4 movement, where you get these long, expansive lines, or ribbons of musical energy that seem to just go on and go on and go on and never seem to run out. In this symphony, because we've stored it up so much, it can be maintained for a longer period of time. So you get these ribbons of musical energy, even to the point where Nilsson does something that perhaps is quite old-fashioned. He writes a fugue in the last movement of this symphony. But it's bonkers, and it gradually whips itself up into this almost kind of chaotic cacophony of sound. But the brilliant thing that Nilsson manages to do, after having whipped all this music up into something that sounds quite close to chaos sometimes, is that he untangles all of these threads that have been built up and channels them towards this E-flat major destination, which is reached really, really emphatically by the end of the movement. Nielsen uses a pedal on E flat. So this is a long note in the bass that's repeated over and over again with a kind of a culmination of the themes that we've heard in the movement so far. It's scored for the full orchestra with a full array of brass, and the timps take on a really dominant role here, just repeating that E flat over and over again right at the end. I think the fact that it doesn't end with bum, bum like that is important for this, because if we think about Sibelius's Fifth Symphony, also in E flat major, what Sibelius does at the end of that is he has these loud chords with wide gaps in between them, so a lot of silence, and then a really self-consciously generic gesture right at the end where it just goes 5-1 like that, and that's the end of the thing. And that really draws attention to how anachronistic that gesture is. So it's almost like a kind of an ironic parody of what it is to write a symphony. Whereas with Nielsen, it's quite different. I think this is a really sincere gesture that he's making, and a kind of a celebration of E flat major as the destination, the tonal destination of the music.